Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of Real Estate News Unpacked. I'm your co-host Marcel, your mortgage specialist, all thing missing middle lending, alongside Ronald Ducuto, and he is your missing middle design specialist. We've got a lot to talk about today. Ronald, what do you have on your plate this week?
Yeah, really interesting stuff have been happening throughout this week and really throughout the last month, kind of flowing into this week. And what I'm looking at this week is essentially what is the various levels of government doing. So we know that the Liberal government have a plan, and we're going to take some look at whether that plan can stand the test and basically provide the solutions needed. The other level of government being provincial, whether they are actually up to the challenge of solving this housing crisis. And then from a municipal level, well, are we actually doing what's right by the various, councils and so forth? Like, are we going to get some of these bylaws passed to actually create housing that we desperately need? So that's some of the things we're going to be looking at today.
Here, right?
Yeah, specifically as of right. Well, is this going to be as of right?
So let's jump into our first article. This is an article from put up by the by Build Building Industry and Land Development Association, and it talks about the report. So the shifting need from housing to accommodate demographic changes, and the key things that this report really highlights is the GTA is growing. We need more than 80,000 people into the region each year, compared to those moving to other parts of Canada. Young families, specifically adults in their late 20s and early 30s, have children under the age of 5. These are the groups that are most likely to move out of the GTA to areas like London, Hamilton, likely in search of larger and lower cost housing. So that's interesting. And then the third thing is this demographic composition and demand in the GTA, which will continue as a result of the increased demand for grade related larger housing. This is your missing middle scale housing, triplexes, fourplexes. Um, so there's higher demand for this proportionate population in the early stages of family formation. So this is really interesting. So basically, in short, what I'm seeing and from a lot of my clients who are kind of developing this kind of stuff, which we're financing, is they're starting to think about larger units. We've got a glut of one bedrooms and on from the condo crisis, or condo crash, I should say. We've got rents decreasing. So people are looking to start differentiating themselves in this missing middle scale composition of housing. Ronald, what's your thoughts? You're designing this stuff. Can these buildings hold 3 bedrooms? Like, I think I only have one 3 bedroom in my portfolio. Most of them are ones and twos.
Yeah, three bedrooms. Three bedrooms are very difficult to get in an urban center. Like it's just quite challenging, and it's of course very expensive if you actually were to rent them or in fact own them. So certainly, definitely a type of product that you'll see more in the suburban kind of environment. But with that said, I think maybe from a different standpoint, what I would think of here is like I kind of heard something about people not the fertility rates are down because people don't have homes to move into to start families. And I'm like wondering, is does that make sense? Like, do
Yeah,
you
is this report off? So, the specifically this number two, right? Young
yeah,
families, specifically adults in their late 20s and
yeah,
early 30s,
hmm
and children under the age of 5
yeah.
are the groups most likely to move out of the GTA to areas like London and Hamilton, in search of larger and lower costs. Is that actually true? Because to
Yeah.
your point, I mean, I think you nailed it, Ron. My understanding is that
Hmm.
like families are having less children. We've got that's actually one of the biggest crises of the world. We have a population issue.
Yeah.
People are having less children, and they're having in later um, in life, right? In
Yeah.
30s, early, into their early 40s. So I I don't know about that fact.
Yeah.
That might need to be double clicked and looked into. But let's continue to move on to the next. So let's move on to our next article, which also talks about this. Obviously the need for more housing. This number is down due to recent immigration policy changes to 3 million now by 2030. But once again, this one put out by the Missing Middle Initiative. Um, and this talks about that need for um, family size units once again. um, the key kind of aspects of this, maybe go to the next slide, Ron. Is this point here where it talks about the government should reset their housing targets in response to reduced population growth. So in this report, they're talking about, okay, the population is reducing. They should pivot away from the is unit is a unit mindset. So the unit is a unit mindset, um, and set targets for 3-bedroom units and non-market below housing market units. Um, so we're so we're talking about reduced population, but we need larger size units. So I think where this is going,
Hmm.
and where I see these larger size units, and I was actually heard this from a number of my clients, kind of looking into this, is the family unit is changing. So maybe as grandma and grandpa get older, maybe they're moving in with you. So maybe the family unit may be only one child, um, but you've got grandma and grandpa, or maybe an aunt or an uncle moving in with you. And I think that's where this kind of 3-bedroom unit context is probably more well suited versus versus I don't think there's families are getting larger and we're bursting from the seams with population. I don't think that's the case. I think the family unit dynamic is changing, and this is where especially if you've got 3 bathrooms, grandma and grandpa can comfortably
Oh.
live with you. And what are your thoughts here, Ron? Once again, you're designing this stuff.
Yeah, I'm
Is
designing.
feasible.
I'll be honest, grandma, grandpa is great, but then I mean, we're talking probably, listen, I think there's a lot of independence that will be required here. Like, in fact, we're currently working right now on a multi-generational living arrangement with a rental component. So essentially, one
What does that
level.
mean? Yeah,
So
what does
that
it mean?
means what we're doing, we're taking this single family home and we're adding a second story, a single family bungalow, adding a second story where it is the young family is going to live. Young family that partially owns that property is going to live
Okay.
on that newly built second story. On the main level, they're going to have like in-laws, like basically the elderly parents living on the main level because it's more accessible and so forth. And then in the basement, they'll have two rental suites, right? So
Okay.
I mean, so you can see how having multiple type of uses within one property, and it fits within the sort of context of the neighborhood. No one really know that
Right.
that's happening there.
Yeah. So for all intents and purposes, a triplex. It sounds like. Right.
For L, it's more like a fourplex, but yes, it does have
A fourplex.
a
Okay.
fourplex.
Because
That's
there's
right.
two
Yeah.
units in the basement. You said, yeah. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
So once again, like this is where I think it's going. On the mortgage side, we're constantly seeing the need for the mortgage helper, being these additional units.
Hmm.
And if grandma and grandpa can come in, they've got that pension money, that good old work for 20, 50 years and collect your pension.
That baby
Um,
boomer money.
Baby boomer. They're bringing cash and they're bringing steady income,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that can be used to support maybe a larger mortgage for a larger property. I think this is where this kind of unit size really becomes interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think if you have any final thoughts there, Ron.
Yeah,
Otherwise,
but I do agree with you. I do agree with you 100%, in fact. And I think that's why it is we're now starting to see, there's a huge push for more and more like missing middle housing, because this actually, you can't really do this in a condo, as you can imagine,
Well,
right? You can't really do this in a condo, is not something that's possible.
yeah.
And really and truly, this is what kind of led me into this, looking at this article. I think this is going to be really interesting. So right now we got the liberal government that have a plan. Of course, at the helm of that government, we got, Carney. He is a economist, so he should know what he's doing here. But this is a housing challenge. So, with that said, there's a lot of really good stuff that they have on their platform that they're saying they're going to try to do to alleviate this housing crisis. And what are some of the things that they're talking about, Marcel? Is that they're saying, well, we will, waive GST. And this is really designed to help new homeowners, right? New homeowners.
So this looks like it's not only just brand new, but this is also substantially renovated, right? So this is interesting. Good, like the value add people can get the benefit of this here, right?
Well, actually, I think that's what a lot of the pontiffs and some of the other, stripes are pushing for. They're saying, well, why don't we extend this further? Why don't we
Yeah,
go further than just saying we are going to waive GST on newly built homes for first time home buyers,
yeah,
like under a million or up to a million? They're saying, like, why don't we go further? Why don't we actually do this for, and I've heard you just mentioned the institute or the association Build, which is building industry, I think land and land development. So they basically have their president there have come out and said, well, why don't we go further with that? Why don't we add that to major renovations? Why don't we add that to anyone that's purchasing a home that's up to $1 million? That will really spur on like housing activity, because right now we're literally in a swamp. Like we're stagnant. Stagnant water, carries no life, right? And here, another thing, I would really want to get your thoughts on this, my friend. So, one of the things that they're talking about is essentially easier mortgages. And I think the long and short here is like they're really looking to, basically, they're looking at the barrier to longer interest rate terms on mortgages.
yeah.
Like, how is the government, you're thinking, could potentially do something like that? Isn't that have to do with like,
Yeah, so that would that would definitely there's one way to do it, and it's just policy change, but there's through OSFI. But the other way is really kind of just to spur on lenders to make those changes. The 10-year option is there. Like not many people choose it. And the reasons are obvious. If you every time you renew, that's better for the industry in terms of changing over your mortgage, fees, et cetera, can be made. um I think this policy could be good, but this needs to be really well thought through. And I think what's more important is whether or not they give different options, 5, 7, maybe they introduce a 7 or 10, is really educating the consumer on what's possible with different optionality. So if I went for a 3 year, this is what could look like. If I went for a 5 year, this is what it could look like. 7, 10, right? And almost like being able to deliver that to consumers, in a very easy and comprehensive way. I think that's more the key. Mortgages are one of the most complex and confusing aspects of real estate, and I think it just needs to be made easier. And that's kind of where I think technology can really help in the coming years. But look, I think they're thinking about things in the right way. Maybe there could be a look at amortization as well. We used to have 40 year amortization. Maybe that might be brought back soon. I think that would help to ease from a cash flow perspective, especially for small developers. I know when I was doing kind of a lot of these missing middle scale stuff, we were using 40 year amortization to hold, which helps with cash flow. So look at step in the right direction. But would love to hear more in terms of what this actually means.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really great that there it's on the table, right? It's actually on the table. I think it's really important. So Carney government is also looking at how they can double construction. And right now, when say double, obviously we can see a number there, like in the next decade, right? They want to double this on an annual basis to 500,000 homes a year. That's 500 with number of zeros behind it, right? So this is quite a challenge because we're doubling. So meaning we currently have we are currently in a situation where we are required to build 250,000 given the fact that they're doubling. So and we're not meeting 250,000. So does policy currently go far enough to allow for that? Right? I
Yeah,
think
like
that's the
when
big
I see
question.
these things, Ron, it's just like it's just a political headline. Like it's just kind of like there's so much required to get us to 500,000 that it's like it's not even worth spending time discussing right now. It's just kind of like a blah blah headline. Let's just move on.
Yeah, awesome. Well,
That's
I
just
like to think
ridiculous.
about that because it's really important. Because the other question I think is very important is like, how are we actually going to fund that? So we have talked about this in the past about the Housing Accelerator Fund half, and you've seen like there's a lot of incentives coming from the federal government to basically incentivize municipality to ease restrictions around zoning. Well, our municipality is actually doing that, right? And I thought this to be really interesting here, but back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, CMHC, which was actually previously called I think it's called the Wartime Housing Canada. CMHC was actually that was the name of CMHC before, right? Until they actually came up with the name CMHC, and then in the 17th, 80s, and 90s, what this article is saying here is that they established a network of early post-war period like 96 branch offices across Canada. And it was staffed with architects, engineer, building inspectors, and loan officials and so forth. Wouldn't you like to get in on something like that, Marcel?
100%.
Yeah, so the government actually had this established, and I think this is where they're leaning towards really reestablishing and rebooting that. Because even right now, I think we'll cover this a bit more. But even right now, there's this CMHC design catalog where it is they have some pre-approved designs and more information to follow on that with regards to the permit documentation. But this is kind of where they're moving back towards, so that they may not necessarily be the builder, but they're going to certainly be in development.
Yeah, I'm not too sure I necessarily agree with this. I think I think you should leave the building to the builders, the private sector. They're the ones that can execute. They've got motivation to execute. Obviously profit margins. Um, and I think we should expand beyond even CMHC, and there should be other organizations that support these levels of financing. We're kind of heavily reliant on CMHC right now to kind of get us out of this, and you know that could be cause for problem in the near to long term future. So I just think more optionality is better. Yeah, when you get into, especially when you get into the realm of financing, and how that supports. Yeah.
No, I could appreciate that comment, my friend. I know when the government, look, we have lots of subways, lots of infrastructure projects that are currently in the billions, right? In the billions and years in excess of the schedule and budget. So, I mean, look, it's always a concern when the government is trying to do something the private sector is already equipped to do, right?
Yeah, and motivated, and that's kind of how it works, right? So
So in fact, here they're saying, well, the Construction Association, CCA, right, estimates that the industry is short by around 1 million workers. So as I'm talking about the private sector is equipped, well, we may not be equipped, and a huge part of the reason is that we don't have enough workers, and where the workers going to come from? We can't just grow
yeah,
workers like crops. So they may have to come from immigration. What do you think
Well,
on that?
yeah, well, this is where, I think, innovation comes into play. I'm a big proponent of innovation and offsite. I was part of a recent survey that was done by the University of New Brunswick, and they've just released that report, which we'll link in the description. um, and there's a lot of work and effort going to trying to figure out offsite construction as a result of that stat that you've just given us with the labor shortage. So I think this is where other countries, the report goes into how other countries, specifically in Europe, have started to solve for this. We've got a long way, but that is, I believe, that is the future of construction, and that's something we have to figure out. Uh, but the work is underway. The report's fantastic. Um, you know, if anyone gets a chance, they should definitely have a read through that.
No, absolutely. So I'll just kind of touch on here and I'll go through these, I guess, relatively quickly. But I just want to say here that, look, we're in a housing crisis, but we're getting pushed back. Like there will always be, if you guys haven't heard it, not in my backyard, NIMBYs. And then we also got I guess the opposite to that, which is, yes, in my backyard, YIMBYs, right? But with that said, I'm not into all these acronyms, but I will say that right now there are some cities that are actually just simply saying no to multiplexes. They're saying no to higher density. They're saying no to upzoning, right? That's the long and short of it, and it is a little bit concerning because we're currently even seeing on a provincial level, right, that even some premiers in various provinces are saying no, like we cannot support a sweeping sort of bill that would support like fourplexes. Right now, there's bills like True Bill 23 that actually supports triplexes on residential parcels of land. But there's a push by the federal government to increase that, and they're trying to do so, as we mentioned before, by way of offering funding through the Housing Accelerator Fund. But there's pushback, and even communities that have previously completed their housing action plans and submitted it and was essentially given some funds, they're now coming back and saying, no, we can't do this because there's some NIMBY politics happening, right?
Yeah. In this case, we're talking about Oakville here. In this particular case. So basically, once again, the debacle between the three levels of government, can't really figure this out. And then you've got these, these NIMBY cities like Oakville that are saying, hey, we're not interested in this. Here's the money back. We're done here. So I think that's interesting because so the money goes back to the Fed, and then what does that mean? Does that recapitalize the pool to go to elsewhere?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, I'm not running that pool there, but yes, I believe so. Essentially, they were given $1.28 million of a $25 million agreement to support with various aspects of creating additional housing, whether it be updating policies and so forth. Right now, with that said, they turned that down, so that 1.28 million now goes back, I believe, into the housing accelerator pool for other municipalities to have access to,
Right.
because now
Right.
they can't meet their commitment because
Yeah.
council have shut down any type of bill that would or approvals that would allow for that. So
Right.
now
Yeah.
that money is now available back to the pool, and I would not only say 1.2 is now $25 million is now back available for other communities. So as you may know, Toronto, I believe, has $473 million in there. Like they have been already achieved a milestone and they've been already given some funds. And Toronto is pushing for sixplexes because why? This also was agreed to in their housing accelerator action plan.
Right.
So
Yeah.
this is really interesting to see how various cities are dealing with this.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's going to come down to those that are developing, like like us, like our customers and clients. You'll get in where you fit in. So, if Oakville's not the place to do multiplexes, which it probably never was, that's definitely where the people doing them are probably living. in their single family mansions. That's what it is, right? So you go to the places where it makes sense and where policy supports the intensification, and that's where that's where you can start to farm, right? So this could be potentially good news for places like Hamilton, city of Toronto, and those places that are a little bit more pro development in the missing middle scale. So could be a
Yeah,
win.
I really like that. And I think one of the big challenges here too as well is we're not just talking simply fourplexes and triplexes and so forth. We're not talking only that class of asset. There's student housing that's actually wrapped up in this. There is also long-term beds that are also wrapped up in such a bill, right? And as you can see how this can now really provide shortage, right? Because
Yeah.
essentially, I think I guess the mindset behind this is like, look, if there's more beds for students and more beds for the elderly when they need to go into that sort of arrangement, then that now leaves a single family home available for a family, right? Again, adding to the solution. But if there's knocking down these type of policies or these type of bills, even though they're getting funding, then you can see how this is not the way to solve a housing crisis.
Yeah. Once again, every city is going to have their kind of their view on this, and if like what like if that's not a city that developers are gonna build in, then I think that's to their detriment, right? Like that's what it'll be. Yeah.
And talking about NIMBYs here, you can just simply see that basically 4 stories within 800 meters of Sheridan, you know, shut down. Like we really need to figure out how it is we want to solve this crisis, right? Do we really want to solve this crisis? Are we really trying to be proactive? More people need to start thinking about that. And again, this is to what we were saying earlier on. This is actually a housing accelerator fund. That's a $4 billion fund that with allocation program for municipalities to bring zoning law up to scratch with federal standards. I won't say provincial, because in this case, our provincial government is saying, nope, there's going to be a lot of screaming and a lot of shouting if they were to pass a bill that essentially encourages or pushes municipalities have 4 units. They say like basically people who already live in those communities are going to come out and say absolutely not. And I think we were talking last week about a triplex in a downtown community that received like almost
For
90 up.
Yeah, fourplex in Midtown. Yeah, Young and Lawrence. So pretty, well-to-do neighborhood. Yeah, 90 objectives. Yeah, so that's an interesting one.
That's interesting. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, look, there's so much happening right now, and I think it's really important that we look at how it is these various cities are looking at this stuff, right? And as I said, Doug Ford is really not, he's really not down for this type of housing. He says it's going to be shouting and screaming, and he doesn't want his government to be involved in something like that. He'd rather not have that. He has enough problems he has enough problems dealing with Highway 413, with the green belt, with Bill 13, Bill 5 that was just kind of shut down. There's just a ton load of things he has to deal with, honestly, to spur like to protect Ontario, right? Bill 17, protect Ontario, build homes faster and smarter. So with that said,
Look at man. Final thoughts on this before we move on is, on one hand he's saying we got to build all these houses, and then on the other hand he's concerned with kicking and screaming. So he's got to make up his mind, where he wants to be. Either you want to build, there's going to be a little bit of disappointment, or you don't, right? You're not going to hit your targets. So
well, let's talk about what the federal government is doing. Open arms. Open arms. So I know we kind of chat a little bit about this, but for those of you who don't know, there is in fact a CMHC design catalog that was developed, right? So the federal government is really thinking about moving into development, and they're starting first with these designs. Have you taken a look at these, Marcel?
yeah, I've seen this, and I've had some involvement with CMHC, so I kind of knew this was coming. Um, this is interesting. So, are these designs that anyone can pick up and use, kind of permit ready? and I guess the idea here is kind of like what they did with the post-war bungalow, where it makes it easier and accessible to pick up a design and get building right away. Is that the intent here?
Well, that's the intent. I guess that's the end goal. But as of right now, it's just simply showing what's the possibility. Like, so for example, you can see here there's a 1 unit dwelling, there's a 2 unit dwelling, there's a fourplex option here as well. Then you got, like, a second fourplex option. And what came by surprise when this was developed, it was supposed to be kind of like, it was supposed to be paused at 4 units. But again, the federal government, understanding that the challenge is upon us right now, we need to find a solution. They actually dropped this sixplex in there, which I think is very interesting because
Interesting. So this is kind of mid residential um kind of scale, that sixplex there. Go back to that. Uh and how would that be broken down? How would that be designed, Ron? So is that like, kind of looks like it's 3 stories, so that's 2 stories, 2 units per story, per floor?
yeah, that's really interesting. So there's some, look, I mean, this is not very clear, but again, this is the document, and we can also just put a link in the description. You guys can check it out yourself. There's some information that they provided. So I don't know if this is very visible on here, but you can see here number of units 6, number of stories 3, and just really high level. This property essentially is, if you want to say in terms of a simplistic way to put it, is like a back-to-back townhouse, right? That's essentially divided by a stairs, which is kind of in the middle. And this would be this type of stairs is very unique to this type of building, right? So with that said, this is the only way you can achieve this type of building and still have a decent enough efficiency. So you're looking at basically 6 2 bedrooms, no basement, by the way.
Right. Okay. So no basement in this case. Could you say? I mean, that could be a good thing, right? Just from a building perspective. Um, could you add a basement, or I mean, now you're getting above 6 units, but maybe if it's on the avenue or whatnot.
Yeah, that's right. So, as a designer, I work with this all the time. Right now in Toronto, you're allowed to do 4 units on any residential parcel of land. So that's allowed.
So
And
your yellow belt. Yellow
that's
belt.
your yellow belt. That's right. So any residential parcel of land, there's R residential, there's RM, RS, RT, RD. There's RA as well, which is kind of outside of the
Yes.
conversation.
Okay. So we're gonna have to unpack that for everyone, maybe in the description. All those different R's and what they mean.
Yeah, that's right. That's
Um,
right. So, but the point that I'm trying to drive home here is that right now 6 units are not allowed, but I know there's a council meeting that's going to be held very soon, and they'll be
June
voting on that.
25th. Right.
June 25th. June 25th. So essentially what happened is that there was a pilot program launched in Scarborough North by, a very forward thinking, and there are a few forward thinking, right, counselors that are really supportive and understand the current challenge and the era that we're living in. And Jamal Myers is one of those. And of course, he actually presented this to council. It was approved for him to allow as a pilot up to 6 units on a residential parcel. Now this was back in February. Now we're fast forward now to June, and as June the 25th, as you mentioned, that's when it is. They're really trying to come back now and say, well,
Actually, sorry,
are
that's
we?
actually June the 12th. I
June
just
the
looked that up.
12th?
June the
Yeah,
12th. So
June
that's,
the
that's
12th.
that's right around the corner. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's a few days from now.
Yeah.
So at that point is when they're going to be running and saying, look, is this something that we're really willing to support here, across Toronto? And it's not looking good. Let's put it that way. It's not looking good. Like, this vote needs everyone's support and voice to be heard. And if we really want to be Torontonians welcoming, I would say that this is a real quality type of asset to include in neighborhoods. I do agree with what's happening. And one of the main things is that we're not changing the scale or the box that has already been defined by the city. So the same
Right. So
box
it's a,
that you're
so,
allowed.
so it's the same box that you'd be permitted to do, say, a fourplex on or a triplex on or whatnot. You have to fit those 6 units into. So for all intents and purposes, you wouldn't be able to tell if the design was done well. Possibly that it was a 6 versus a 4. Like you wouldn't really be able to tell.
You really wouldn't be able to tell the difference. And in fact, if you look at the image here, right, like this image is a sixplex, is sitting right between two, I guess, a two-story home. You can't really tell the difference, right? Now I will say the box that is actually kind of defined by Toronto is a slightly taller than this, so you might be able to do a flat roof and even add a fourth story. But of course, that does increase the building code requirements, and that's a whole other conversation. There needs to be some sort of discussion surrounding how could we also support this type of housing with not necessarily reduced requirements, but well thought out requirements that would fit and still maintain the health and safety of the occupants within those buildings.
Right. So I guess that's what kind of the pilots are going towards showing then, right?
Well, the pilots are really good on the zoning side. The building code conversation is a whole other.
That's a whole other. That's a whole other kettle of fish.
Yeah, honestly, it really is. Because the building code has just recently been updated to. For the last 12 years, we've been using an old, like not old, but basically a building code that was defined back in 2012. It was just updated in 2024 and is now effective in 2025. And essentially what that means is that they're probably not going back to the drawing boards for another 12 years. Right?
Hopefully sooner.
Yeah, hopefully sooner. That's right.
Well, you know what? On that note, I think we'll wrap it there. Great conversation this week, Ron. Lots unpacked. Stay tuned for upcoming sessions and episodes that we've got. Ron, take us home.
Yeah, awesome. I really appreciate you guys joining us again here. We're remaining consistent. We're bringing the value. If you guys like, subscribe to our channel and share this content, it does help us to reach more people. But in addition to that, leave us some comments. We're more than happy to respond to those comments. And we'll also have some contact information in there. If you guys want to reach out on a one-on-one basis, we can certainly schedule that. But for now, we'll say we appreciate you guys' time and we'll see you guys next week.
See ya.